very excited that we're starting. It's been a very interesting journey to put up the symposium, and we're going to talk about the theme a little bit more. First of all, I wanted to thank the team of the Fourth Arctic Art Forum. It's a very fruitful and interesting collaboration, and we always wanted to work with Kristina Dragina and Ekaterina Sharova, and finally we're having this chance. And the symposium is a part of, I think, a very important event that has been happening in the north of Russia for the past 4 years and has mapped very interesting artistic processes that are happening in the Russian north and north of Norway and in Finland and Sweden. When we were thinking about the theme of the symposium, I think we were, Anya and I, we were trying to grasp most immediate processes that are happening at the moment, that are also enforced on us by the pandemic, but are also, have been stimulated by the pandemic, has been strengthened by the pandemic, and has been also revealed by the global crisis that we are all experiencing at the moment. I think one of the very obvious things that the pandemic has revealed is how much we all are dependent on each other, and how many processes that we take for granted are interconnected and related. And also related to our joint future, that we also should perceive as a joint, shared a future, as something that's coming and gonna touch upon all of us. So I think the question of the future has again become very urgent. Somehow future has turned into something that had been supposed to kind of prolong the present, and future had been cancelled. But the pandemic, on one hand, I think brought the question about the future back. What is future? Is there a future, or is there a lack of future? And how altogether we can prolong the future, because the maybe absence of a clear idea of the future is also becoming a very serious situation, context that we have to deal with.
What I can add is, I guess this conversation and the symposium which we composed and landed on the Arctic Art Forum is very much about another conversation about the planetary conditions, but also it's a search for new language, visual, academic, sociological language in order to. What is this? It's kind of something. What is this? Kind of weird inclusion. So this language is, the need for this language in every discipline is very much important to find or to articulate in order to find the way that would lead to cognitive changes about the way of how we exist. And I guess the composition of different presentations that we put together within the framework of the same of the symposium is somehow another way, another step forward towards this the search for new language that will help us to articulate new moral framework. And I guess that I don't know, I was thinking a lot about that, kind of like all this studies and research that somehow help us to understand this condition in which we exist. And we kind of like, we try as curators, as cultural workers, to contribute to that discourse. And I hope this symposium will give us a possibility to at least find some clues to rethink the way how we exist, but also for us it's very important to build up some sort of a public platform where we can bring the knowledge and new thoughts and new perspectives perspectives into the public spotlight. So for us, it's very important to put together as many voices from as many disciplines as possible to convey our message and to make it stronger in a way. So, and to send it out there. So the structure of the symposium is somehow divided into four research strands. And today we have, today we have a first panel. And it's supposed to give us understanding of conditions of a very important region in the Earth. It's Arctic region, and but thinking about these planetary conditions, it's for us it was very important to narrow down the discourse to at least like one geography, and to articulate the particularities and history and also current state of Arctic region and high north. And also from looking at this region, we can also project to other geographies and go from the local conditions towards analysis to more global processes that are happening right now.
Right, because we're going to talk a lot about a periphery of capitalism. We're going to talk a lot about hidden historic narratives. We're going to be talking about counter histories and way to articulate this counter history. And of course, when we talk a lot of all about these issues, we also understand that they are applicable to other places. And there are also voices that are underrepresented that are not only in the north, but also in the south and in other places. So how do we deal with this power structures and power relations that interfere in the process of making some voices heard? And in a way, we hope that the symposium will also contribute to making some unheard voices stronger and replacing them at the not only Nordic and Northern map, but also international map. And I also wanted to say that in order to make our conversation maybe more kind of embracing different spheres of knowledge, we've invited not only curators, but also artists and journalists, researchers, people who work a lot with environmental issues, just to give maybe a wider scope on the issues that we're going to be dealing with during the symposium. So I think we can jump to the first panel and start presenting our speakers. Anna, would you like to introduce Madina Tlostanova?
Yes, sure. So the first panel sounds like during the first panel for us was very important to look at the conditions, to sort of articulate, to build up a framework and bigger picture in a way about the region which we're going to talk about, and also to connect it with existing studies and theories. And I think Madina is a person that will help us to go through, to look at the to look at through the lens of decolonial, post-colonial feminism, to look at the region, but also maybe touch upon like some post-Soviet conditions, maybe some processes, structural processes that are happening in within the planet, but also maybe narrow it down towards a particular territory. So Madina's talk sounds, title for Madina's talk sounds like the planetary crisis and ways to refuturing in the northeast of the Anthropocene. And Madina is really happy that you agreed to contribute to the symposium. It's been a long wanted collaboration. We've been following your studies and research and presentations and writing for quite some time, and we're really happy that you are with us today. Madina is a professor of post-colonial feminism at the Department of Thematic Studies, Gender Studies in Lidköping University in Sweden. And in her research, she focuses on decoloniality through the lens of feminism and the global South, indigenous cosmologists, stability, and looking through all of these processes through the field of arts, design, philosophy, and social science, I guess. So, Madina, the floor is yours. We're really happy that you're here, and we're really excited about your presentation.
Thank you very much, Anna, Maria. Thank you for inviting me. It's my honor. I don't know if I can live up to your expectations and answer all the questions and touch upon all the things that you mentioned, but I will try, and then we'll see what happens. So usually I'm the one who stresses the importance of positionality in thinking and acting, what we call the geopolitics and corpopolitics of being, of sensing and thinking, the importance of this positionality and also the critique from this positionality of the modern colonial discourse that pretends to be universal, yet at the same time hides its provincial Euromodern nature. But today I would risk maybe to start from a larger scale and for a moment imagine a possibility of thinking humans as an incredibly diverse yet still interlinked collective that can use the pronoun we in the sense of human species and fellow terrestrials, to quote Latour's recent formulation. So other species and forms of life on the planet are also included then. And of course, I'm aware of the fact that this we is very tentative and very problematic, but I feel that today we cannot think the present or think the future without having this scale in mind. Today, it's high time we started thinking relationally, rather than continue just thinking analytically. And of course, again, I'm aware of the fact that it's easier said than done, because the whole modern colonial epistemic system and educational system also have moved in an opposite direction of narrow disciplines, applied problems, instrumental knowledge, answering the question of how and not what or why. There are many different ways to interpret this situation in which we collectively find ourselves today. Some of them continue to assume that a return to normality and the continuation of the modern colonial political, economic, social, and racial status quo are still possible. These are actually the people who are exclusionary and selective in their understanding of this we, and dismiss the majority of the world's population, human and other population, as falling out of modernity, falling out of progress, development, and hence having no future. The leading mood has remained that of the chronophobic status quo, refusing to face the unsustainability of the current dominant condition, which, as you probably know, Donna Haraway called a Capitalism. So it's a lifestyle with its endless race for growth, for progress, for the sake of consuming more and more. The negative phase of globalization coming to its apex today threatens to fold the world into a digital slavery mode, where coloniality would finally stop to be seen as a problem of only migrants, refugees, colonized people, indigenous people, or just a fashionable term of the academic elite, because it will be a direct confrontation with each and every person living on Earth, and not only people, actually. There are also other people, other groups who realize the complexity of the problems that the world faces today, and offer to solve them with the means that are products of this very modern colonial world system that we inhabit. It can be failed political institutions and ideologies. It can be also failed technological euphoria that is often presented as a way of salvation, whereas we know that in reality, technologies are the key agents in altering human ontology, and the disease is mistakenly prescribed as the cure. There are also, of course, those who mistakenly, I would say, prescribe romantic antiquarianism of the good old past days and communities. That sounds wonderful, but is impossible to implement. But no matter how we interpret this crisis, we have to agree that human species finds itself in the midst of an unprecedented planetary catastrophe that has more visible, fast representations, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, and also the slower, but no less devastating and potentially defuturing elements, such as the climate change that is associated with extreme weather events, catastrophes, loss of biodiversity, natural resource stress, geopolitical fragmentation, of course, expressed through wars and armed conflicts. And in that sense, COVID is equally invisible and inconspicuous as the climate change, but it acts faster and lacks a clear teleology. And that is something that connects them, of course. It's very hard to blame someone concrete and specific for this disaster. Yet the uncertain but rather distant future of the planetary catastrophe has suddenly been brought very close to us all, putting the humanity into the conditions of fast and grim realization of futurelessness, lack of the future. For me, unsettlement is a very fitting concept to describe this current human condition. Unsettlement. It has multiple interpretations connecting the material level of the imminent global movement of cities, people, businesses in the coming decades due to the climate change, due to unsustainable economies, geopolitical wars and conflicts, but also, even more importantly, unsettlement means also an existential crisis, existential effects of this resettlement of peoples, leaving them, or maybe us, with no sense of the future. Unsettlement recognizes an ending without any clear sense of what is beginning. So it's a perfect in-betweenness. It carries a feeling of foreboding that what will arrive will be unwelcome. As such, life is lived in these ever-expanding conditions of uncertainty, and the past then acts as a memory occupied by pain, by loss of all that was experienced and treasured, and the present is lived as a non-life. And the future then is merely is nothing. It's a void filled with a daily mix of faint hope and despair. A very grim picture, right? Unsettlement has turned into a leitmotif of life in crisis for many people, manifested on the ontological, existential, affective, and material levels. And massive migration is only one most obvious sign of this unsettlement. But there are also increasingly numerous precarious lives of those who seemingly stay in place and do not migrate anywhere, but their lives become more and more unsettled. Again, COVID-19 crisis has enormously accelerated and intensified this tendency, leaving most of us feeling unsafe and unhomed in the most ordinary sense, and previously secure situations in the family, in our homes, in the streets of our cities, among our friends. Before this crisis, catastrophic capitalism has already renaturalized the war ethics, justifying our collective permanent loss of freedoms under the excuse of fighting the consequences of various catastrophes, natural, geopolitical, technological. And as a result, we have this normalization of the state of exception, discussed by many scholars, and often induced by the dual state that has already started turning every citizen into a potential threat, needing to be monitored. And actually, that again started much before COVID-19. These factors add to an escalating economic and social unsustainability, defunct politics with its failed institutions, failed nation states, international unions and bodies that have nothing to offer, except, again, this permanent state of exception, competition for global natural resources, and population displacements, triggering more conflicts and wars, and today this kind of coronavirus capitalism, to follow Naomi Klein. The increased unsettlement includes the post-democratic and post-peace contexts, the commercialization of all spheres of life and its dispensability, the fear to realize the movement of time, that is what is called by chronophobia, and the fear to realize the finiteness, the fragility of the kind of existence we've built for ourselves and other species, and as a result, inability to imagine a different world, and not only imagine, but also start working for its implementation. It's largely, I think, a lacking understanding of interconnectedness of all aspects of the major crisis we inhabit, which is already altering, changing our nature as humans. And this is a very interesting topic to discuss. It's a fitful grasping of isolated elements of being by our inept, derelational kind of cognition thinking, without being able to relate them dynamically and pluriversally, as we say in decolonial option. In decolonial terms, pluriversality terms and maintaining a coexistence and correlation of many different interacting and intersecting positions with equal rights to existence. As a concept is linked with pluralism, of course, that recognizes multiple perspectives, displacing the notion of one or homogeneous world. The situation with climate or water refugees is a bit different from the more familiar geopolitical and clearly military conflicts and as causes of mass migration that we remember from the recent past. This is different because it's a geopolitics of mere survival. The grim reality of forever barren territories, useless for habitation, agriculture, vast and previously densely populated plains that are flooded by the rising ocean, has no use for political casuistic, let's say, to define the degree of democracy in different regimes. Instead, it magnifies the situation of survival as such, unconnected to political preferences, at least in any straightforward way. This kind of unsettlement downsizes, I would say, and humbles the humanity to its more realistic dimension and accentuates both the new forms of inequality and the new ways to solidarity, which are very difficult to implement. A combination of these and other factors that I've just very, very briefly sketched has received a trendy name of the Anthropocene, understood mostly as an emergent time after the present geological time, the Holocene, as a designation of the influences of the anthropocentric actions and transforming climatic, ecological, and environmental systems and futures. The concept is highly contested, as you know, and criticized from many positions and mainly from its Euromodern and paradoxically anthropocentric myopia, I would say. But in any case, unsettlement, I think, is what it has to offer humans and other species as a current shared pluriversal condition marked by defuturing. We experience it differently depending on our trajectories, privileges, disadvantages, and in the context of the looming fragmentation of the human species that is evidently going to act as a ground for a new dehumanization, I would say, a new cycle of dehumanization. This brings us back to the modern colonial human taxonomy that has been in place for over 500 years now and has not essentially changed in its grading of human life with differential values. The human taxonomization process has now been extended to the human-technology relation, as seen in conflicting notions of the post-human. The horror of what is happening is that our species is now in the initial stages of fragmenting. As several scholars have pointed out, we are becoming a fractured species with a changing ontological nature, and such selection can so easily become decisive of who deserves to survive and which groups of inferior people can be sacrificed. So it's a new looming type of racism that's in the making. And this is a crucial aspect of today's crisis, that the Anthropocene, as a provincial elitist theory of the privileged global north, does not even start to discuss or realize, therefore remaining mostly irrelevant and even, I would say, unethical in the global south, for example, or in places that don't fit both definitions. The present complex crisis has a clear, if not the main, ecological dimension as one of the obvious global challenges, which is often described in universalist terms. And it's a big mistake, because environmental challenges cannot have a universal language of description, as they are perceived differently by different human collectives. All the fashionable discussions of sustainability, environmental justice are still largely grounded in the old modern colonial subject-object dichotomy of nature and humans, while desirable ecological models are still based on the preservation of nature for its continuous, rational, efficient exploitation by these very same humans. In this model, the Euro-modern subject denies his belonging to nature / animality, forgets that he's a technological animal, and not the only technological animal for that matter, thus becoming derelational from the world and reinstating this objectification of nature as an object of externalized observation, of externalized study. Today's ecological crisis, it seems, is a result of precisely this modern epistemic deficiency that is grounded in ontological alterity, in taking ourselves out of the world and occupying this very strange delocalized vantage point in looking at the world and cognizing the world in this ontologically ruptured way. Hence, the fatal human loss of proportionate need and consumption, which I think is a very important indicator, a measure that one finds not only in the majority of indigenous cosmologies that never consume more than necessary, economists, ethics, indigenous cosmologies, economists, and ethics, but also interestingly enough, is the same we find in other animals, other than humans. So it looks like as long as we keep the concept of nature as the other of humans, of culture or civilization, anthropocentrism will still continue to reign, even if in paradoxical forms of criticizing itself, as we see now. Even asking science to help, Western philosophy is unable to get out of this dead end. A decolonial approach is different. It could cancel the dichotomy of nature and culture as such and shift to a complex relationality and process-based view of our entanglements with the planet, with other lives, with inanimate matter. And in this sense, what is needed is a major rethinking of naturalized and massively imposed concepts and ways of, let's say, making sense of the world, even we can say like that. Finally, if we look beyond the dichotomies of the global north and global south and pay attention to more complex and multi-layered situations of the poor north, for instance, of inter-imperial intersections and entanglements, where unsettlement has long been normalized and even turned into a starting point for refuturing, we can try to get out of this binary black and white thinking that still persists in critical theory, including its environmental aspects. This shift would allow transcending academic thinking and go in the direction of agency and bottom-up activism, social, political, and artistic. It can generate transversal relational solidarity beyond the bankrupt institutions and power structures and focus on other ways of resistance, re-existence, the networks of resources for launching new communities of change, which could help us start creating a new political imagination as a way to refuturing. This is still, of course, a very subjunctive modality of a new political imagination and agency. This does not mean that we need to try to restore the human-sized and human-centered world. Rather, I think it means that we should try to use our human abilities, including critical thinking and technologies, as well as relational practices grounded in realization of our unity with the world, for advancing the sense of responsibility and efforts to save the life on our planet in all its forms, and cooperate rather than compete. That's very important. Cooperate rather than compete in order to survive. For that, we need to stop seeing ourselves as victims negotiating a better affirmative action, or masters oblivious to anything outside of our lifespans, to become nurturers of this re-existence, a redefinition and resignification of life in conditions of dignity, a praxis of the otherwise. And I'm quoting here Catherine Walsh and Walter Mignola. And also as initiators of deep coalitions, and this is Maria Lugones's term, the colonial feminist, Maria Lugones's term, that are grounded in solidarities, but they are never reducing the multiplicity spanning across the differences, never trying to erase the differences. It works with them and from them. This balancing act is a strive to overcome the immobilizing locality of continental and national ontologies and the modern colonial predicament, the bleakness of the looming world of total surveillance, but also inevitable self-limitations instead of thoughtless consumption and growth. The re-existing element in these emerging communities of change would have to be a collective and not an individual or individualistic endeavor, changing the mode of representation and visuality and understanding of the self, of the world, and a new political imagination to the future and to refuturing. These communities of change, grounded of necessity in unsettlement, would have to make it into a positive design, ontological design, I mean, for the fragile and unstable world and the humbled human being who would have to learn how to make this immense and boundless, scarred and injured world into a communal home again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madina. That was very complex description of the reality. You try to really grasp together the really like planetary scope. And I think that's a good start for us to go like zoom in into like more details and more particularities through the lens of local cultures, local traditions, local knowledge. And I think it's will be a good shift to our next presentation, to Anna Soloviova, who will really bring us through the different way of surviving local cultures in high north, in Arctic region. So through her presentation, we will dive into particularities of the region, and then in the future discussion after that, we're gonna like combine these two presentation, and we also will invite Nastya to comment on both of your presentation. Masha, do you want to introduce Anna?
I just wanted to add that, and Madina, thank you. It's almost a manifesto.
Yeah.
And I have a few questions that I will ask later on. And for everyone who would like to ask some questions, please use our chat on YouTube. And if you want to ask some questions in Zoom, you can also type them here in our chat so that we wouldn't miss any comments or questions, and what bring all of our audience into a discussion.
Masha, do you want to introduce Anna?
Yeah.
Or?
Anna, would you like to speak English or Russian? What would be better for you? Anna? We can't hear you.
We can't hear you. You have to turn on sound.
Okay, I will just introduce Anna while she's figuring out the technical solution. So Anna Soloviova is a doctor of philosophy and professor at the Department of World History at the Nordic Arctic Federal University in Arkhangelsk, where we were all supposed to be had we not had Corona and Zoom. And Anna studied history at Petrozavodsk State University and theory and history of culture at Russian Institute of Cultural Research in Moscow. And she also studied cultural anthropology and cultural studies at University of Minnesota and University of Pittsburgh. And her spheres of interest include culture and historical dynamics of the Northern Arctic sphere, space images formation, interethnic and intercultural communication in the high north, culture and anthropological specifics of the migration and mobility in the high north. And Anna will give us, I think, a kind of overlook of the Russian North at the global art stage, and she will talk about decolonizing authenticity, and we'll use the Nordic context, the Russian Nordic context as an example.
So my theme is Russian North at the global art stage, and I will be talking more about the precise example of the heritage crafts in the in the European north of Russia. And I take it as a case that demonstrates the way how diverse cultural community historically participate in the construction of the Northern Russian culture. And before I start my presentation, I need to explain that by the Northern Russian culture, I mean definitely the European north of Russia, because there's a lot of different understandings of the Russian north. The one that includes the biggest part of the Far East, and then also the Arctic North in the Siberian area. That's not the one that I imply. I imply the historical understanding of the Russian North as a European north of Russia. So it's an area which is closely connected to the Scandinavian countries and Finland, and that is actively understood from this point of view in the area where I live. So, okay, I guess I still can't demonstrate my PowerPoint, but well, another question which I would like to mention is the way how the material objects of the Northern Russia use kind of demonstrate the authenticity material, or the idea of authenticity to interface between the Russian national and the global Western culture. And that's a historical discourse that appeared in the 19th century, and that in a way constructed the authenticity as the pure Russianness of the Northern Russian area that was opposed to the westernized elites of the 19th century Russia. So at the same time, the heritage folk crafts combine different traditional techniques, different symbolic patterns, and different natural materials to reproduce locally embedded values and knowledge. Though today the situation is really fragmented, because when the people are doing their art and trying to find their way in the global commercial context, they are using all sorts of different interpretations of the local symbols. Some of these interpretations appeared in the Imperial Russia, and they are historically embedded in the beginning of the 20th century. Others were developed in the Soviet time, and especially in the 60s and 70s, when the Russian North became more understood as a cultural region, or the region of folklore past, or the region of antiques. And then some of them appeared in the 90s of the 20th century, when the regionalisms in Russia used a lot of different local symbolic features to develop political activization. Though the Russian North is more understood in the cultural terms than in the political terms, mainly because of this tradition of interpretation of it as a heritage region that appeared in the 19th century. So as my slides are not shown,
we're trying to figure it out. So
here they are. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, so tell several words about the 19th century context of the Russian culture development. And it was in the second part of the 19th century that the Russian elites realized that the necessity to create their own national ideologies and national myths. And that's exactly in this context when they went to the area of northwestern Russia to collect different material objects and folklore traditions, and to create from them something which would look like the typical great Russians' national culture embedded in the pre-Western time, in the areas and in the traditions before Peter the Great reforms that made Russian elites Western. So it was in this context that the northern Russia became the frame for identifying the Russian culture in the Western context. And now it includes the national symbols creation and also the international tourism and souvenir production, which still represents the northern Russian symbols and ideas at the international scene. So also the term Russian North appeared in the late 19th century because before the area was called Pomorye and then the north of Russia, and it had a lot of different other historical namings. And it's interesting that the term appeared as a result of the traveling of the Arkhangelsk area governor Engelgard through the area. He wrote the travel notes in the form of richly and published them in the form of richly illustrated book, which was titled The Russian North. So as a result, this area became, first of all, understood from the point of view of traveling notes and some kind of exotic province, which is good to visit both for the Russian elites and for the tourists from abroad. And at the same time, it was the political leader and economical leader who introduced this term as part of the kind of PR project for his province. Also, there were several other processes in the late 19th century Russia that showed that kind of constructed the authenticity of the Russian North as an authentic and archaic region. So now my presentation is here. And the slide shows different pictures that were produced in the 19th century Russia by the famous Russian artists like Ivan Bilibin and Vasily Vereshchagin, who traveled in the North and also represented it at the international stage. So to clarify this idea of heritage representation of the North, I show you the quotation from Dmitry Likhachev, academic Dmitry Likhachev, story about the Russian North, where he establishes the idea of the cultural monument of this area, which is understood since the 19th century as a spiritually Russian and antique Russian region. So, but if we come to the heritage folk crafts, and they are also very important to represent the authenticity of the area because they are produced locally and they are creating the material part of the area representation. They are associated with the rural life and they respect traditions of the past. And of course, they're close to nature that kind of creates the idea of their sustainability. And also the monetary value of the artifacts reflect the degree to which they are byproduct of different traditions and the way how their aesthetics and designs reflect the whole culture and worldview of the community. So that's why I look at the heritage crafts, first of all, as a case for my study. In the Imperial Russia before the revolution and also in the Soviet Union, the monetary value and export revenues from the souvenirs that were created in the with the motifs of the local heritage crafts stimulated the creation of the new industrial infrastructures that are called in Russian кустарные промыслы and народные промыслы. First in Imperial Russia, they were created by a famous Russian industrialist Mamontov, and then later in the Soviet Union, different institutions participated in this process. So this so-called authentic crafts were created in the cooperation of professional designers and the local craftsmen, who together reinvented the local Northern Russian folk crafts in a hybrid form of the national souvenirs that are customary made, first of all, for the foreign public. And in the contemporary situation, the global cultural market also exploits a lot of local exotics. So it is still commercially profitable to replicate the design patterns of the Northern Russian folk crafts that are produced in the Soviet context. And here I have some pictures from the local enterprise, which was created in the 1967 in Arkhangelsk. It's called Belomorsky Uzory, and it's the enterprise where the designers created the patterns that were later industrially reproduced, and the patterns were based on the local folk crafts, techniques, materials, and also the ornamental patterns. So here in the picture, you can see three objects that are now are protected by the intellectual property law as the patterns for the local and heritage crafts made by designers and reproduced by designers in this local factory. But also in the 70s of the 19th century, in the local areas began the Northern Russian folk craft reconstruction movement. A lot of people from the local community started to reproduce the knowledge of heritage crafts that they got from their older people who are still knew and still kind of remembered how to do the old craft from their childhood. So also it influenced the choice of the content and the strategies for the educational program that taught so-called authentic ethnic cultures, authentic Russian culture in the Arkhangelsk region, and then in Volогодskaya region, in Karelia and in Murmansk. This movement is still really active, but if we look at the ways of evaluation it, there is a question of how authentic it is, or is the authenticity of this craft historically emergent? It is not static, of course, and you cannot think about some kind of a particular museum object that it started from. Also, today, the discourse of authenticity often arises in both the local residents and visitors' accounts of the experiences in the North, and then there are a lot of people who participate in that who are not community members. And then also, it's not today the real or original thing which is standing outside of cultural interpretation. So under the influence of experience economy, also the folk lifestyles of the communities and the crafts of the communities obtain a lot of different new meanings that are reflecting the actual cultural trends. So here there are several cases that I would want just to show to you. Well, in the year of 2018, the Walk Italia created the photo session in Arkhangelsk region. And then the main idea was to show all the different Russian-style objects on the background of the heritage landscape in one of the villages in the Russian North. But the production of this photo session made a very deep reaction on the local people living in the area, so they created the response with their photo flash mob, where they showed that they are not so strangely looking and they are not so exotic as Vogue Italia showed to them. The case is quite interesting because it demonstrates that the stylistic experience and also the representation of the style of the Russian North can be the story which is actively kind of stressing the importance of local narratives and understandings of the way how local cultures look like. Also, if we look at the fragmented and decentralized cultural context in the heritage crafts evaluation in the 21st century, we can trace several trends in it. First of all, there is still a lot of qualitative selection of the authentic objects that are integrated in the historically established hierarchies of different classic genres, trends, and national art schools. Like we have a lot of different statuses for the local craftsmen that are given to them by the organizations and institutions that developed in the Soviet time, and the crafts were highly sponsored by the state organizations. At the same time, we have a lot of contemporary art projects that reflect the traditions as something which is multidimensional, and that places it into the landscapes and the folklore landscapes that diminish the borders between the artists, designers, and local craftsmen, between the creative products that are represented in museums, in the galleries, and the processes that create them, between the authors and the audiences. And also the local communities use their craftsmanship today as a creative expression of their identity stories, with the way how they can share their dreams about the future and cherish their heritage landscapes. So here are several examples. Well, first of all, so the slide needs to be coming. Yeah. There are a lot of locally produced traditional crafts that are trying to apply the embedded knowledge, for example, about the birch bark container making, to different artistic projects, but they are still working in the traditions of the craft that they got from their ancestors. And here are two examples. Alexander Shutikhin is the craftsman from Kotlas, who represents the very deep and very artistic knowledge of the birch bark as a material. Also, we have an interesting museum of Shevelov family in Kargopol, who create Kargopolskaya toys, but also do a lot of different other crafts like birch bark containers where they put their locally produced honey. Then also there is another trend when the landscape is used and the folk community is used as the place of creative experiments. And here I can think about the wonderful experience of art residence and museum Mariin Dom in Chakala village, which is very in a very good relations with Arctic Art Institute, and then there are several projects made there. But what is important here is that they support the multiple cultural experience, both of the local communities and also of the artists. In a way, the trend could be called the art of living in the contemporary northern village, as a way to understanding different old traditions and reinterpretation of the past traditions. So also the pictures show first the Parata Baska project, which was curated by Ekaterina Sharova, where the artists tried to understand the local traditions from the point of view of their artistic imagination, and also studying the deep roots of the ornaments and the landscapes, but also the local communities reflected on it. And then also the Chakala Museum opening was quite an interesting project, and the picture by Irina Yefimova that I also used to represent my speech shows how the as an object only by the gesture of putting the sign that it is an art residence now. The thing of the whole story of creation, an art object from the community should be studied more deeply, but I can't do it now, of course. Then also there is the story of fine crafts that are produced like heritage crafts in a way. And I put here a question because old technologies and raw materials are becoming, through the art of designers, part of the luxury culture that is consumed for the elites and intellectual elites. There is a question of how much heritage is in it, and how it could be applied to the democratic and sustainable art of the local communities who, for the most part, cannot afford having these objects. But anyway, this minimalist object that are created using the images of the traditional crafts, addressing some elitarian segment of the fragile in a way because they are dependent on the general trends in the artistic stage. And also some of these products are interesting to as a concept that are showing how the Northern Russian heritage could be developed to the modern storytelling, or how the traditional everyday used objects of the past can be created as a pure aesthetic meditation instruments for the contemporary elites and for the artistic surroundings. Then, so here there are two objects which I would like to show you. And first of all, this is quite well-known Sohar brand by Dmitry Milovanov, who uses the traditions of wood techniques and wood reproduction of the Russian North to create his objects. And then also the objects of Dmitry Belyaev that are called pomors, and then they're now shown at the competition between the Russian designers that is held in the Museum of Decorative Art in Moscow. Also, there is another thing which happens in this fragmented context of reinterpretation of traditions when the ethnic ornament is taken away from the traditional objects and is added to some kind of new materials to create traditional and authentic appearance. So usually it's done with the local souvenirs. But what is interesting is that the local souvenirs are used by the communities to tell their own identity stories, and that they know a lot about the local ornaments when they buy or represent these souvenirs on the artistic stage. So here there are several pictures that I'd like to show to you with the recreation of the Northern Russian folk painting motifs. Folk painting of the Northern Dwina is one of the richest heritage traditions that we had in the past, that developed in the late 17th, 18th century, and widely and very deeply represented in different museums today. But we can see how they're used for the souvenir production when the favorite motifs of the folklore paintings like birds and then different flowers are decorating the new objects. Like there is a series of dolls made by Elena Pantina and Anastasia Piskunova that are called birds, and they're shown at different art shows with the artistic dolls. And then also there are a lot of souvenirs that are representing the wood painting at the new materials. And then also there are several other souvenir production stories that are represented at the local stage. One of the famous brands is the Bronsky brand, and Mikhail Bronsky is one of the artists who does the painting at all sorts of different new materials like fabrics and then paper. He produces also local tea packaged in the paper that is handmade, that is decorated with the handmade painting. So this is also one of the ways of deconstructing the idea of totality of interpretation of the heritage interpretation that was developed in the late 19th century and applying it to some kind of a new materials and new formats of representing the artistic objects of the Russian North. So as a result, I would like to state that the global cultural state today is something which is called authentic, demonstrates a lot of hybrid features. And the hybridity means the ambivalence and the mimicry that appears in the space between the northern local understanding of the art and then the Russian national understanding of the art, and of course the global and or so-called Western cultures that are still very much present as tourists, as artistic trends, as souvenir consumers in the Russian North. Some of the references are given here, and sorry for all the problems that I had with these presentations. I guess you can look at my presentation later. Thank you.
Okay. Anna, thank you so much. So it's kind of a very challenging task to connect Madina's very kind of planetary picture at the reality and very detailed and very very local in a way story of Anna's presentations. But maybe we can ask Anastasia Vepreva now to comment, being also from Arkhangelsk and living in St. Petersburg, being an international artist. We're curious, what is your take on the what Anna explained in terms of this totality, appropriation of local and indigenous culture, which is like we're talking about indigenous knowledge, local culture, but what is exactly behind it? Anna tried to really unpack now in her presentation. And so, Nastya, what would be your thoughts and takes and reflections?
Okay, so it's a hard question for me, but I tried to pin some key points. I think it's quite important. So as artists, I can say about art world, because this is a part of all globalistic process and like example for other process also. If you are an artist from North and you want to be kind of famous, so you should go to Western countries or to the capital of your country or find help of some institutions. So you need to be a part of this hierarchical system, colonial system, and to continue your career. So you, like famous scientist Lomonosov, you should leave your northern countries and go to the capital, St. Petersburg, and there you, like a part of other artists, you should understand how to be in this circle. So you. The first way, you can forget about your locality and start to be a part of all these global issues like capitalistic issues, ecological issues, social, political issues. Or you should remember your locality and use this locality like a capitalistic trend, because it's your... it's very profitable to you to be from some northern interesting country. You can be more interesting among other artists. So it's the second way, and this way is also has two ways. So if you want to represent your locality during global scene, you can choose the easy way, like. It it has a dangerous to be like a self-parody of your locality. Like you can imagine some mysteries or local indigenous knowledges that it's hard to translate. this is a problem. So this, if you have an easy way, or you choose a hard way to try to connect all your locality knowledge with all global issues. But you probably will have a problem of not translatable. So the three key points, I think, in this situation is like a self-colonization, or the first one. The second is Western or Moscow or institutional admission, and the third one is a logistic of knowledge. This is a question: who has the right to speak? It's quite important for every time. If you use Western knowledge or you use the local knowledge, what is the local knowledge? Because it's hard to understand what is the local knowledge, because when we speak about indigenous people, for example, it's easy to imagine how they look, because we can imagine a picture of them, and it's quite hard to listen them. So it's important to speak from this knowledge. I mean, I think it's a crucial point for all this situation. And if you are a local artist, you should hardly produce your own knowledge. Sorry, I lost my line.
Do you feel, Nastya, that in a way that if you're a local artist reproducing local context, you put yourself in a very time framework as an artist? Or why or like a certain category that you want to avoid to be put into? Why can you develop this argument maybe?
Okay, I mean that we have a lot of examples of, for example, art of indigenous people, but we have not so much examples of theory of indigenous people. So the theory and the discourse that they can produce by themselves. So we rather will use some theoretical issues from the West, and not so quite popular use some. I even can't imagine some academical or knowledge production from indigenous people. I mean. If we will speak about decolonization or colonization, we will quoting the same surnames, but maybe we should, from our side, try to find this exactly knowledge from local people, because we have in the history of ideas a lot of examples of. Some interesting keys or some interesting researchers who worked in these small local communities in every time. I mean, in this century or the last century, and they worked about this, about their ideas and the history, like a history that wrote from the capital of the city. They just. Exclude these ideas. So I mean, we should find, we should research these cases about local scientists, local researchers, and trying to include this in the global discourse.
But I think that's what Madina from her studies and her research and Anna are trying to do. But that's a kind of they work from different angle. I guess Madina, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on the term indigenous cosmology and.
Well, I mean, I think it's quite clear, no? I use the term cosmology because I don't like the Western terms that come from Western philosophic traditions. And that's why I wouldn't say ontology or epistemology. I sometimes do if I'm dealing with the Western audience, which is ignorant. So you have to explain things, be patient with them. But when we're speaking among ourselves in indigenous communities, then of course we would rather say cosmology because it's a more correct term. As you know from history, from anthropology, these things are not divided in indigenous thinking. Yeah, so it's an idea of the world, but also human being as part of it and other beings. So there is no division that I was trying to talk about. Like there's no division into subject and nature or subject and the world out there, right? And that's why the word cosmology maybe better fits here. Although, of course, any language is problematic in that sense, right? Any Western language or Russian for that matter would be also problematic because it has a very strong division into subject and object. And so even linguistically, we reinstate that division. But then there is, as Anastasia sort of mentioned that in an indirect way, there is always a problem. Like if you are writing in an indigenous language or you're writing using the terms that only indigenous people can understand, then of course you are bound to talk for very few people, right? So your audience will be very narrow in that sense. And so it's always a choice. So what do you do about it? Are you loyal to your indigenous community or your village or whatever? And so you continue to do it for them, or it's more important for you maybe to make your ideas known to the world. And to what extent are you ready to sacrifice your authenticity, whatever we understand that? I'm also very skeptical about authenticity. Of course, there is no purity in culture, as we know. But then, I think it's a dilemma that all artists confront, at least the indigenous ones that I deal with a lot and I write about them. And very often they ask this question, like they would go and say, my work will be, some European museum offered me to buy my work. What should I do? So it's like a fight. I want to be in the European Museum, of course, but on the other hand, I don't want my art to be orientalized and to put there some exotic object, right? So what do you do? What is the answer for you? I don't know.
Is it the answer to Nastya? Because actually, in addition to what Madina said, this question, I want to add also a question from the chat about one audience. She's also asking about maybe actually Anna and Nastya can also come up with some answers. She's Angelika Dolinina. She's saying that art and the building up a successful brand, it's two different things. And Nastya, what kind of creative process you're talking about?
About locality and art, that we have a lot of artists. So art is not some sacrificed sphere. It's kind of a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of capitalistic ways of producing things. Art exists as other spheres also. And when I said about locality, I mean that so if you just move to Berlin, where a lot of artists that works with a lot of interesting global issues, and you want to be something different from them. So you want to be in the Western Museum. So you want to sell your work and take money from Western countries and return back them to your country. And you use your locality. It's quite kind of problem for me also. So how to represent this locality. So I'm from north from Arkhangelsk, but I live in St. Petersburg. So I can be the same time St. Petersburg artists and the Arkhangelsk artists. It's quite profitable for me. So in their cases, when somebody needs some local artists, it's easy for them to take me. But the right way for them is to go to the northern cities and find artists there. But with artists from there, we have a lot of problems because they, I don't know, they may be afraid to be something different. And sometimes they and me also, when I travel through Europe and trying to make exhibition there, this problem of self-colonization, I try to be to be easy. I don't know, because this problem of non-translatable is the same problem like for problem issues of inclusive, how to be translatable and how to help other persons to understand you. It's hard, and you, I don't know, try to make a lot of translations. You use your own language. You use your, I don't know, language of your parents, other international language, and in every time you lose something, and this is a problem. I don't know how to.
Yeah, I think Madina put her life into trying to find this language, especially in the book "How to Be Post-Soviet." Yeah. And I have also a question to Madina about the term community of new communities of change. So can you please maybe, I mean, you sort of gave us some clues about the features of these new communities of change, but can you maybe elaborate a little bit more? What do you mean by that? And maybe come up with some examples.
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's actually a work in progress. I'm writing a work now where I elaborate more on that, but it's very good that you're asking because it also triggers my thinking. Actually, I started from my collaboration with Tony Fry, who is a very famous design theorist from Australia, and my next book is co-authored with him. It will be out in 2 weeks or in 3 weeks. And in this book, we reflect on this concept that Tony also started working on both in his research, but also in his activity as a designer, a design theorist, critical design thinker, I would say, a philosopher of design. So this community of change, it's not something authentic. It's not an indigenous community in an ethnic sense or ethnic cultural sense. It's a mixture. It's a creolization of many things, I would say. Yeah, because it presupposes, of course, some local people, not necessarily indigenous, but maybe some local people who just live there for decades, or maybe not for decades, but for whom this particular space is important. Also some researchers, thinkers, activists, artists, designers, and this community is a very unstable thing. It's processual, right? It's more like an event in this kind of classical post-Marxist sense, and it's meant to deal with particular problems, for example, problems of unsettlement. Imagine, for instance, there is a city that needs to be moved because in the coming decades it will be flooded by the ocean, right? So this community of change would consist of people who know what can be done in this case, like scientists, but not only scientists, but also local people who've lived there, as I said, for centuries, and for whom a lot more is at stake. So it's not like scientists come and tell them what to do, but it's more a collaborative process, a dialogue, and also a long set of actions. Right, and we argue also that the university as an institution has to go because it's a very colonial institution, and it gives people this detached knowledge that nobody can use and derelational, yeah, because it's put into this small disciplines. And instead of that, it's important to have an hermetic university, as Tony Fry calls it, meaning that people who think together, they go actually to the place where the problem is. And they live there and they communicate and collaborate and then listen to these indigenous people and local people and artists and activists and all stakeholders. I hate the word, but yes, stakeholders, to discuss what can be done and decide it together. So, I mean, it's not an ethnic community. It's a very mixed community of people with different views, but people with open heads, so to say, that are ready to listen to each other and work together. And I know that it sounds very utopian, but I'm afraid that in the future, this is what we will all have to deal with. I don't believe in the state, any state. I don't believe in political institutions that I think most of them are a blast from the 20th century. They're just not working. And probably this will be the future, that these communities will be surviving on their own, you know, as communities and rebuilding something and redesigning what was designed badly, let's say, like extractivist sites and all of these horrible things that we're left with. You know it very well, because the North is a very good example of that, what you can do badly to a nature, right? And to humans, of course, and other living beings. So it's like designing away these signs of modernity and carefully, you know, little by little trying to find some balance and some kind of survival. In a sense that it's not only about humans, but it's also about other lives and the planet. Yeah, and I know it sounds utopian, but this is how I see the future, if you ask me, in 100 years from now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also wanted to address one moment in what Madina said in continuation, what you have just elaborated on a community of change, because I also had a question about them. But, you know, when we were talking about solidarity and how is it possible to enhance solidarity at the backdrop of this growing inequality, something that you also mentioned in your presentation, because now we see that inequality is growing, and we also see that this idea of unsettlement and futurelessness exists for some people. And for some people, their life hasn't changed that much. You know, they're very certain about their future being fine because they feel protected, they feel privileged, they feel very white about themselves. So in that condition, when we see how rapidly we polarize, how the process of solidarity that is very much needed, how can we stimulate it? So communities of change is probably one way. Are there other mechanisms for that?
Well, community of change, it's more like an ideal product of what we're talking about, but we have to do something in order to reach that result, right? Well, for me, maybe the most difficult step here for all of us, because we are still living inside modernity, and it's very hard to get out of it, you know, because it's not possible in this world to survive without it. But at the same time, I think we can start with smaller steps inside these institutions like museums and universities and communities and local communities also, you know, like to thinking otherwise, thinking together and questioning and destabilizing and infiltrating modernity from within, let's say, with these little islands of decoloniality. For instance, refusing to act as rivals to each other, because this is what modernity is grounded in. Like it's agonistics. You have to always compete with everybody, right? And this is what is ingrained so deeply in our minds. And this is unfortunately also something that prevents the small communities, local or communities of change, or any critical communities, let's say, from this solidarity and from these connections, because instead of that, they're competing for some resources, they're competing for some charity, right? And that's why I even use the term like a victimhood rivalry. Like who was more victim, you know, and who has more rights to get something, which groups. And this is very unhealthy because it still is in the same logic. Like there is modernity that you cannot question, the modern colonial capitalist logic. And then we all come and ask for some little inclusion or whatever. No, I don't want to be included. I want to dismantle the whole system and build a different one, rather than I don't want to be included as an exotic other in this system. And as long as we continue playing this game, of course, nothing is going to change, right? I mean, in my area of feminism, I do a lot of projects grounded in this. For example, I said, why do we have to listen always to Western white feminists who will tell us what is meant by feminism? For example, we have socialist and post-socialist women and also feminists and gender studies people there, right? And activists, which is very important. And we have, for example, the third world, the global south today. And both of these groups, they have to communicate through the West. They have to have the sanction of the Western feminist, in this case, knowledge. And so the suggestion, let's not do it. We're not interested in what the West tells us. We can communicate directly and see what we have to say to each other. And the book that will be published soon, actually, we did it with two other co-editors. We decided to not only have monologuous chapters, but also have conversations and interviews and dialogues. And it's very interesting to read a dialogue, not of Western feminism and some feminism from the global south, but rather of a feminist from, for example, sub-Saharan Africa and the feminists from former Yugoslavia. You know, they have more interesting things to say to each other, rather than always having to deal with the Western appreciation, Western kind of concepts, Western ways of looking at the gender problematic or issues. And I think it's true about art as well. Of course, we know that art market is a very rigid thing. So it's true what Nastya said. You have to self-orientalize, I would say, right? So you have to sell yourself as a new post-colonial goods, intellectual or artistic goods in this sense. But you can do it with a tongue in cheek, you know? You can do it ironically. You can do it actually making fun of the whole thing, and that's what many artists do, right? And writers, like post-colonial writers, they know that something is always lost in translation. But as Salman Rushdie said 35 years ago, something is also gained in translation, and that is an interesting. What is gained? You know, these transcultural things that actually they are born as a result of this translations or lack of translations. And I think that as somebody who is constantly negotiating this local and global, you have advantages that no Western artists have. You have a border optic, you know, you can look from different angles on what you're doing. And this is a privilege, actually. And I think that you have to kind of realize it and then start working with it more in a creative way. And I think this is what we can do. Yeah, we should do.
I also
thanks for giving us
kind of taught us to having always tongue in cheek. You know, we've kind of grew between layers when we had to sort of pretend and use specific language for a specific situation. So even though sometimes we're maybe sad about this past, it also has taught us lots of tricks that are very applicable to contemporary situation. I see that Katya Sharapova would like to join the conversation, and Katya has a question. Katya, jump in, please, and show us your face. And Katya Sharapova.
Katya, turn on the sound, please.
Yes. Do you hear me now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. We're very happy that everything works finally, because we had some technical challenges. But first of all, I'm very happy to see here the speakers. I would like to thank you, and it's a fantastic possibility for us at the Arctic Art Forum to collaborate both with top curators and to have a possibility to join this conversation. I just wanted to comment about this. I wanted to comment about two things, because, of course, we can talk a lot, and I will have my own presentation tomorrow, because many questions which are discussed tonight are we have been sitting with them for many years. I just wanted to comment on what Madina said about the white feminists who is like their agenda and contrasting it with other feminisms. Because for my practice and my choice of going back to the north and going back to the hometown is a kind of an echo and a result of taking part in a large symposium where I experienced exactly the same. And it was in 2014. And during the first upper symposium, there were Russian feminists and American feminists. And taking part in this, in organizing this and seeing these invisible threads, because many things are not visible. You don't see them. They're not published. They're not translated in the media. The way how the media translated all the stories is completely different because they are unknowledgeable. They know nothing about Northern Russia or even the North in general. And also, I found it interesting how the American feminist artists were talking to the Russian artists. And it was more like a peer and a student position. And I found it very challenging. So, but since then, this is another thing I wanted to comment about Anastasia, because she said that she can hardly imagine any indigenous theories. Having worked in the North for 6 years now, we have met lots of indigenous theories, especially, but mostly in the Nordic countries. And last year, the Arctic Art Summit, I was moderating a panel with Gunvor Guttorm, who is a PhD in Sami. She's a PhD in Duodji. Duodji is a Sami handicrafts. But here we have completely different story. We have a completely different context, and we know that for 2 days ago, the Office of Contemporary Art exporting artists to the Venice Biennale, they selected Sami artists. So we have theory, we have art critics, we have infrastructure, but it's a completely different context. When I was invited as an advisor for an Indigenous Quintiennale in the National Gallery of Canada, I was facing lots of challenges because in Russia we have a completely different situation. Like Anastasia named now, when we start thinking, okay, who are our Indigenous artists? Contemporary Indigenous artists. What is contemporary Indigenous art? Can I take an artist from Dagestan and call them Indigenous? It's like we don't have any theory, we don't have infrastructure, and I think that this symposium and this panel is a fantastic possibility to discuss this. I think I will stop here and maybe continue tomorrow. But thank you very much for your comments. I just really enjoy after all the technical stuff was solved. So thank you very much.
I have a question, actually. It's a complex one, but I'm also preoccupied with this. And also, like, it's very directly connected into the idea of interdependency. Interdependency in relation to ecological and political agenda. So you kind of people of hybrid identity as us, so you understand like post-Soviet context, you understand Western context. So in relation to nature, as Madina said, there are like, in the Western countries, there is a very much agenda of saving nature for the future use is happening. So while in post-Russian context, in relation to natural resources, we're not even there. There is some ecological optimism going on within like some with some ecological activist communities. It's clear that totally different discourses or not discourses is happening within this corporate subculture. And so my question is, or rather invitation to think together is, So I kind of lost. Give me a second. What I was trying to say. So basically, yes. So there is no even understanding about this idea of saving nature, because we have a lot of this in Russia, and there is a. And it's always like there is no end of this somehow. There is no end of resources. And that's, I guess, also traveling the tradition of lack of critical discourse, critical ecological discourses traveling from Soviet time, when it was actually no framework for alternative ecological discourse, because it was very much suppressed. And what is happening now is also some sort of lack of understanding on the level of policy and level of politics and level of economy. There is still this lack of understanding that resources have end. So I'm just wondering, like, what is your, what do you think could change this chain of thinking, and how to explain this post-Soviet ecological conditions in the region or to the neighboring countries, like to sort of describe the complex ecological agenda of Russia within the region.
But I don't think it's lack of knowledge. I think it's simply neglect and indifference and carelessness, and just, caring about very small, privileged political elite, but in certain parts of geography, but not giving a shit about other parts of the country that are very resourceful. And we spoke a lot about it with Katya and Christina, and you, of course, when we're planning the symposium forum, how the North is being this resource and this kind of, peripheral territory that only supplies but never receives anything back, and is being used for ages as, supply of timber and anything. And this big case with Shees is an example of this policy that is based on neglect and, I think, confidence. And here we kind of, put the entire conversation into political dimension. So I don't have an answer about how.
I'm just wondering to think together, like where this chain of thought starts, really, because we all know this, this very traditional culture in different parts of Russia, very close to earth. It's very kind of deeply rooted also to the region, like Anna explained. There is deep tradition in relation to culture and nature. There is kind of no separation, really. So, do you think that in Soviet time, this tradition was totally break? People were forced to move from their land and relocate, and then they lost relation to their to nature, to what they have to take care for, or I don't know. Enlighten me in this. I guess I maybe need more insight from you guys.
I also have several comments to make, both about the questions that were given to Anastasia, and then also about your question. But I will start from your question. I think it's not very much about the physical unsettlement or physical displacement, but a lot about the cultural displacement and unsettlement, because in the Soviet time, the people framed themselves more in the broader national discourse of understanding economical relations, and especially if you look at the areas that were traditionally Russian and didn't have any kind of alternative ethnic identity that could be used as kind of additional to understanding the locality and sustainability and so on. So as a result, now we see the areas, like the area where I live when I am on my vacation in the village, where people are unsettled culturally when they look at the modern surroundings with the modern buildings built in the 70s of the Soviet Union as something which is victimizing them. But in the 70s, then they all wanted to move into the new buildings from the old Russian wooden houses. They understood it as something like a privilege for them to be part of the modern development of their villages. So this unsettlement is a process that actually it's a term which I really liked a lot from the Madina's talk, because it should be studied from the point of view of the process. And then I can think about the case that demonstrates the new community building in the northern villages. Then people are involved in the processes of reconstruction of the wooden monuments like wooden churches, chapels, houses. And it's a really interesting process to look after, because artists and people from outside, like researchers, are usually starting this project. And then there are some community members who would like to participate, and then also a lot of community members who are for a long time ignorant about that. But then the process starts as a community process, and it's more kind of an artistic process than a religious or any kind of ideological thing. And if you look at the way how the small steps of development of heritage, of new heritage understanding as a starting for the narrative or community narrative, if you look at that, you can trace some of the things that could be understandable as a new community building. So I see processes like that in different villages in the north, and they are also well developed into the art objects sometimes, like in Rovdina Gora in Kholmogorsky region, and then also, as I said, in Mariin Dom in the Charkola village in Piniga. So the concept of communities of change can be applied to this process. So if you ask about the art as the brand maker, then I think about the two levels of understanding that in the contemporary Russian context where I live. Well, first is kind of opposing the local voice of an artist to the mass production. Like a lot of cultural objects in the modern localities in the Arkhangelsk region are produced as a mass production, all these billboards, and then also a lot of different things that are manufactured mass in the Soviet context and in the modern big enterprises. So in this way, there could be a local voice that is built on the heritage tradition, opposed to the mass-produced brands and heard by the local people. But then also there's a second, more international level when you need to say something as local in the multiple voices and the polyphony of voices. And here is a challenge, of course, because you cannot use the universal language because it kind of is producing authenticity, as I said, from the point of view of the Western discourse. But then you also need to tell something that could be translatable, that could be understood, as Anastasia said, by the other people. And but that's not only the challenge, that's a really good thing to study and to start, because this way you can say something new about you and then about the way how you live. And the process of artistic creation is a very important thing here. If you somehow, as Anastasia does, and as artist, if you somehow may introduce the people from outside into the process and kind of show how you work with these artifacts in your artistic reality, that helps, I think, to understand the way how you are rooted, embedded in the locality, and how you use the local languages. But you also have to be aware of the kind of these universal languages that are highly used in the modern discourse, and that are, of course, colonizing the local knowledge a lot. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to tell. First of all, yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Does anyone have any more comments or questions or reflections on what has been said so far?
Yeah, well, the reason why I was asking this question, I was just, since we talk about interdependency, I think Russian region or post-Soviet region, it is so important player when it comes to natural resources, right? It also supplies lots of regions around. And so in order to understand how things are working, what is the ecological studies of post-Soviet Russia, what are the not outspoken maybe features of ecological subculture, and I think it's very important also maybe to translate wider, and I'm also in the process of understanding it, the relation of not only local communities, but also the mentality of government and corporation towards this some sort of instinctual nature and this efficiency in this business. So I think this is very complex processes which we, I guess, try to unpack within our symposium as well. Hopefully, we compose some sort of maybe new information for our audience, for our potential or audience who are going to listen the recordings of our conversations. Maybe some closing notes from you, Madina, Anna, Nastya.
But I'm very inspired with this imperative presentation by Madina and the community of change, this kind of agents of change. And I want to believe in this concept. I like it, and I think that there are already a lot of people who are promoting change on maybe their local level, and I think the forum is a part of this community change movement in a way by producing this new knowledge and pushing this new knowledge and pushing the borders of this Nordic discourse and raising all of these important issues and kind of unpacking this narratives that also have been repressed for years. So in kind of thinking of interdependency, I also think that it's very important to learn from each other in this knowledge exchange and this experience exchange, and this not rejection, but challenging the Western lens, I think will be very, very useful, because sometimes we don't really reflect that much upon how much it's embedded in our vision, how we are very much connected to looking at it, looking through it at the world. So kind of decolonizing oneself would also be a very important process to practice on a regular basis in order to kind of stimulate this growing of community of change. I don't know. It's a very kind of pathos speech, but I think this year has contributed to us using lots of pathos words in a way. So thank you everyone for joining tonight, and I'm very happy with how we opened, despite all the technical difficulties that we had in the beginning. And let's continue tomorrow. And tomorrow we're going to be talking about political aspects of the Arctic. I think something also very important to discuss in terms of ecological and political imaginary.
Yeah, so we have two parts. Fourth panel is going to be very much about shared forecast. We're going to be thinking and challenging notion of different borders, geographical, mental, disciplinary. And in the second half, we're going to talk about, we're going to take a step back in a way in history and look about suppressed historical, ecological narrative and how about ecological disasters in the past, how to learn from that. And if it any possibility actually that it could lead us to rethinking about our actions in the future. So please join everyone, and I also saying that to the audience which is with us now on different YouTube channels. So we're not saying goodbye, but we're saying till tomorrow. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.